You may have heard of or at least they're kind of batting these ideas back and forth, but Utah is the first one to really come out and do something about this. There's a law in Utah that could dramatically limit teens' access to social media. And for more on that conversation, we head to from Americans for Prosperity. James Czerniawski joins us now on your 956 Drive Home, Senior Tech and Innovation Policy Analyst at Americans for Prosperity. So first, let's talk about the Utah law in general here. This is actual law. This wasn't a proposal. This was something they actually passed, right? The first state in the union?
Yes, you're absolutely right. This is the first state to go and pass a proposal like that seeks to basically restrict the ability of minors to access, any kind of social media platform without parental consent, and exposing the platforms to massive liability in the process.
What was the thought process behind the law? What does it seek to do? I mean, aside
Sure.
from the obvious, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think the nexus for a lot of these kinds of proposals that we're seeing right now, because Utah might have been the first, but plenty of states are certainly trying to follow suit with similar proposals. Basically, what the point of the legislation is, I think, driving from is that there's a lot of conversations around teen mental health and their, quote unquote, addiction to social media. And a lot of lawmakers have expressed a desire to want to do something. Normally, for proposals like this, you would expect to see it on the federal level. But I think that a lot of states feel like they have an opportunity here to go and do it themselves rather than wait for Congress because, Congress isn't exactly known for being fast on these kinds of things. So for better or worse, we're having states engage in this kind of, legislation. And basically, like I said, what it aims to do is put that kind of restriction where a kid couldn't go and create or have an account on social media without having that parental permission to do it. And they would also have to go and verify their age. Usually the understanding is that while it's going to be punted to an agency for rulemaking, it would have to be most likely done through either uploading government IDs or going and submitting to a facial recognition scan that would do age estimation to guess how old you are within reason.
Right, the moral arguments aside, but it's interesting that even though if you were to put the moral arguments aside, the actual law in practice, it gets fascinating because you happen to be giving a lot of information to the government about that, and that seems it seems to go against a lot of the other principles that certain parties like to champion in instances like this, which is fascinating to me. Our guest is James Czerniawski. He is the Senior Tech and Innovation Policy Analyst at Americans for Prosperity, our guest in your 956 Drive Home. Now, this is a fascinating topic. I know Davey has some questions about this in general as well. Go ahead, Davey.
I've heard it said that for a long time from people, I guess, on the liberal side of the spectrum, that they're concerned about the information corporate America has about us, how much they know about us. Conservatives tend to be more concerned about what the government knows about us. In Europe, I read that they're much tighter about what private interests can gather and keep. Is there much room for both sides to meet and decide, you get yours and we get ours, and see what I'm getting at? Because I'm...
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a great question, and I think that a lot of people like to point to Europe as a good example here because they were certainly the first to go and enact a pretty broad and stringent data privacy law. But the problem with the GDPR is that in terms of its effectiveness right now, it's not necessarily all that great. I think that compliance looks very different depending on what company you are. And ultimately, from the consumer side, the only thing that we really notably got out of the GDPR were a bunch of those very annoying cookie notifications. Click here to accept all the cookies. They're not delicious, I assure you. But when we're looking at this particular question, I think what it comes down to is that we do not want to go and put companies in the position to have to go and collect more information, particularly information on our children. I don't think that that's what we want to be encouraging here.
No.
And I think that we also should rightly in this conversation call out the government trying to play a role in making that collection of data happen. We certainly would not want to see that happen where the government's doing that, and that's a separate conversation that's going on the Hill right now, federally speaking, given the administrative state's rampant abuses of power that it has in part because it has access to that information. So I think that there's a very, very serious conversation that needs to be had, and hopefully we can strike the balance between wanting to protect children and also respecting our privacy. And I think that these proposals, while well-intentioned, just happen to miss the mark.
Well, you're wrong. No, I'm kidding. I'm not.
No, it brings up. It does bring up some very interesting questions where the gray area tends to get blurred. Like we start looking at these little slippery gray scale perspectives, because parents aren't really looking after their kids, because if they were, this wouldn't be happening in the first place.
I wonder, can you really shut kids off from access to?
I mean, a lot of websites in particular, and I'm sure James will back me up on this, is that a lot of websites don't let you sign up for an account themselves unless you're 13. But I mean, honestly, James, how easy is it for them to just say, hey, I'm gonna scroll the year of my birth date back, a few extra years, so that I'm able to go on this website, and my parents aren't gonna know about it. I'm on my iPad in my room, away from eyes of parental authority.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point to raise, and certainly as a kid who had that fight with his mother growing up in a digital age of wanting to get access to the computer and websites, it was definitely a fun back and forth between her and I. But, I think that it just goes to highlight just how difficult this is, because no matter what kinds of controls you're trying to put in, people do figure out ways to circumvent the system. I think that it's important to note that if the system is trying to focus on age verification, that kids will go and probably find a way to either A, utilize virtual private networks, VPNs, to circumvent the geolocation that would trigger this requirement, or B, they would just go and get fake IDs at an earlier age.
No.
Where now they can go and, get a fake mom and dad to go and sign off on the permission slip, if you will. So I think that there's plenty of unintended consequences. It's just not seriously thought out. And again, it is really difficult, especially if we're talking about, let's say, going for the age estimation through facial recognition. It's pretty easy to tell the difference, let's say, between a 13 and an 18-year-old or a 17-year-old, but it's much more difficult to ascertain the difference between somebody that might be at that age range of 15, 16, 17, 18, because depending on, where you're at biologically with puberty and whatnot, how you might appear, some people look a lot older, some people look a lot younger, right? So it's just technically very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this stuff during the when they were grilling the CEO of TikTok, like, hey, are you sure that, you're not doing all these things? And then we're turning around and saying, hey, could you, by the way, do all these things to make sure that our kids are safe?
Why don't we just
Our guest is James Czerniawski, the Senior Tech and Innovation Policy Analyst at Americans for Prosperity, our guest on your 956 Right Phone. We're talking about the Utah law on limiting minors' social media access. And you had mentioned that this was something that can open them up to a bunch of lawsuits and things like that. What do you see coming down the pike in the future for them?
Yeah, I mean, again, assuming that this law doesn't have some kind of injunction on it, the way it's written, parents could go and bring lawsuits against these companies for a wide plethora of reasons and harms. And while originally one of the bills that was signed by the governor was introduced as an under 16 ban of social media for those kids under 16, that language did get removed, but there was a liability language that was inserted in there that puts in what's called the rebuttable presumption, which says that if I am a user that is 13 to 16, and I bring a suit claiming that you caused me harm, the burden shifts to the company to have to go and disprove my claim, not the other way around. And that's really basically still saying, in effect, if you're a lawyer advising these social media companies on how to comply, you would basically tell them, why in God's name would you ever allow a 16 or under, that 13 to 16 onto your platform? That would just expose you to massive amounts of liability.
How do we educate parents and make them more proficient with their digital devices and help them with overseeing how their kids are behaving on the internet? How do we do that? You always hear some of the older generations, I don't understand this newfangled thing, but we use it every day. It's fascinating. How do we do that?
Yeah, I think it's a great conversation, and it starts at home, right? Like, I think parents have to have that practical and real conversation with their kids in terms of what they can expect online. It's not all roses. It's not all bad as it's been vilified to be either. Like, kids have actually have some negative, some positive things for using social media, particularly during the pandemic when everybody was locked down. Social media served as a great way for people to stay connected and feel like they could express themselves and be part of a community in ways that wasn't possible because of the lockdowns, right? So I think that there's absolutely some positive stuff there. Some of the science that's being, represented isn't exactly a full story, if you will. But for parents, it's about having that conversation with your kid first and foremost. And secondly, I hate to say it, but just do a Google search. Like, this stuff is readily available for you. Like, on your Apple iPhone, they have parental controls available to you. There are dozens of apps that are readily available for parents to go and actually institute this tailored online experience for their children. And I think that, for kids, they need to be educated too, right? Like I said, it's not all bad. It's not all good either. So we need to go and make sure that they're aware of what are the downsides of using social media with social media literacy education, if you will. So that way we can avoid them going and being in a situation where they might, do something and experience some unintended consequences from that too, right? So I think that there's a lot of education to go around. And I think lastly for the companies, it's about them going and identifying parents who might not be as online and trying to connect them with tools that they have on these platforms, right? So I think that there's a lot of education that needs to go around here.
Davis, final question from Mr. Czerniawski from Americans for Prosperity.
This will be something which has to be done by government. I mean, that's the closest. That's the only way people are going to believe that there's something being done. I think they're not going to believe. They're not going to believe the company when they says, "Oh yeah, we got your back on this deal." So it's got to come from government.
I personally don't think so. I think that it's one of those things where I don't trust the government to try to slide into a role of co-parenting in a household. And that's more or less what I think this kind of legislation ultimately does. Not every single household has the same kind of environment. And these bills, while well-intentioned, I think kind of assume that every house is the same, and it's not. So, I'm not saying that you take the companies at their word, but I do think that, for our conversation before, it's just about how do we educate parents so that they're more aware, and how do we educate children so they're more aware. Because if we're equipping parents with the tools to narrowly tailor online experiences, then, we can go and tackle this a lot better. I think the last thing that we want to do is empower the government in a way, even though it might be with good intentions, where they can go and then extend that power beyond what was originally designed with the legislation. So, again, I'm always skeptical of it just because I think that there are better solutions out there. But I understand I'm not going to sit there and say, hey, trust the companies and take it for their word. But that's where we think that it's on individuals to go and, have that responsibility to go and take that up so that way, we can all play a role in how we fix this.
Oh, yeah, the government would never take that too far with Americans' information on the internet. They would never do that. James, hey, thanks a lot for your time and for breaking it down for us. Appreciate it as usual. James Czerniawski is the Senior Tech and Innovation Policy Analyst at Americans for Prosperity. He's our guest on News Talk 710 KURV, your 956 Drive Home.